Hello and welcome to This Week in X presented by Crushing Comics. I'm your host Peter and I'm here to talk to you about all of the X-Men comic books out this week, Wednesday, September 12th. And there were quite a few. We had Domino, Iceman, Old Man Logan, X-Men Blue, and X-23 out this week. Now, what am I going to talk about? Well, this is not just a recap. I'm not here to read the issues to you. I want you to buy the comics if you're interested in them. And it's not just a review or a reaction where I say, I like this, I didn't like that. I'm trying to get a little bit deeper into these X-Men comic books to tell you a little bit about where they came from, the characters' histories, and why or why not they're working for me, so that hopefully you can find out if they're working for you too. So without anything else to say, let's get started. First this week is Domino issue number 6. It's the end of the first arc of this very popular Domino title. Domino number 6 was written by Gail Simone with art from David Baldeón, color art from Jesus Bertov, letters from Clayton Cowles, and a cover from Greg Land and Frank D'Armata. It was edited by Chris Robinson and X-Men line editor Jordan White. Domino has a long and spotty history in X-Men. And by spotty, I mean she's not spotty because she's got a dot over her eye. Swear I wasn't planning that. She has not frequently been the focus of a lot of X-Men stories. She is very much a supporting character. She's only had 2 of her own limited series, and they were both well over a decade ago, almost 2 decades ago at this point. And she also has not been a super prominent supporting player even in the last 8 years of X-Men outside of X-Force and Weapon X. And in those titles, she doesn't tend to get a lot of personal development other than whoever she's flirting with, usually Colossus or Warpath. So where were we starting really in this new Gail Simone series that was out this year to take advantage of the buzz, let's be all honest, of Domino appearing in Deadpool 2, the movie? Well, Gail Simone seems to have picked up on a few things about Domino. One, some of her history from one of her 2 limited series that told us a little bit about her parentage, but also some supporting characters that we know she's had a run-in with in Deadpool. Now, I do not profess to be a Deadpool expert. I have not read all of Deadpool. He puts out a lot of comic books. But Gail Simone was the writer who wrote Deadpool when he was like almost canned back in the 90s and early 2000s. And Gail Simone kind of brought him back from the brink and brought him into popularity. So saying that, I'm telling you now that this Domino title feels a lot like Deadpool, that very goofy, gaggy, loose-lipped version of Deadpool that we had before he got so popular that we just had to deliver a gag every single second. And if you're not into that and you came into this expecting a very mutant book, I don't know if you're really going to enjoy it. Simone definitely grounds it in Domino's mutantdom. It has a lot to do with how her mutant power works. And even at the beginning in the first issue, we see all of the different X-Men who come to Domino's birthday party. So she's very connected to that. But this arc has played out in terms of its Domino's history with her own secret soldier program that she came out of that were trying to harness her luck power. And we see a little bit about her antagonist from that program in the same way that Wolverine has antagonists, in the same way that X-23 has antagonists, and how they have it out for Domino because by definition, she's the lucky one. She's the one that everything good happens to and everything works out in her favor. Now, the way her power actually is said to work is that it is an unconsciously controlled minor telekinetic field around her body that causes her to have some things tip in her favor, but she can't necessarily concentrate on that happening. And this whole Gail Simone series has been playing with whether or not she can control that. So here we are in issue 6. What happened here and was it any good? Well, this was really the climactic confrontation between Domino and her pursuer. But what took a little bit of the weight out of that for me is that we were still juggling a lot of B-plots, and they took up a lot of the space in this issue. So we have the B-plot of Outlaw and Diamondback. We really left last issue thinking Diamondback had died, and so we picked that back up. And then there's also this dangling plot thread of who had sold out Domino from within her own organization, and that gets resolved too in a lot of pages that really do not feel necessary. They're not super funny, and it's just more pages that we wish we could have spent with Domino. Now, In addition to that, Domino has been in the middle of training with Shang-Chi, the master of Kung Fu, he of the deadly hands of Kung Fu, for the past couple of issues. Now, this has allowed her to keep up her constant streak of just hitting on the hot guy. And I have to say, it's really been a lot of fun to see her just totally melt in the face of Shang-Chi. But, Domino, even when she's super flirty with guys in other settings, tends to have a sort of coolness to her that she does not have here. Now, maybe that's because she's our point of view character, right? Because we're in her head, we get her narration. So, of course, she's going to seem a little extra gushy compared to her normal self. And perhaps that's what I'm reacting to, but I just feel like she was written a little too silly, a little too love-struck, a little too romantically aggressive, but who knows? Maybe that's the thing that's all been going on in her head. But that adds yet another layer into what's happening here in Domino 6, which is that she's got Shang-Chi by her side for this fight, and she's also trying to take into account all of the training that she's had with him in these few days that have passed in his tutelage. Altogether, it didn't entirely work for me because it was just so much. Gail Simone had been threading in this very interesting flashback plot that had to do with Domino growing up in the super soldiers program that she was in. And I know that we were getting the conclusion of that in the modern day, but I kind of just wanted more of that rather than all of these other cutaway scenes. I also don't know if I really bought that she learned so much about her power in so short a time with Shang-Chi, and Shang-Chi has not been used particularly effectively, I don't think, here. He's not been written in his full former super spy self. So, when you subtract all that, we actually have very few pages devoted to the fight here. And it's a good fight, and it's fun to see Domino succeed, and especially the tag on the fight feels very in character for Domino. So she's an assassin, and she's killed a lot of people, and even though she tends to be portrayed in X-Force formats as one of the kind of nicer, kinder mutants, that's not her MO long term. So I don't know how much else to tell you to read this Domino series. Honestly, I probably came into it almost as cold as you, except for I happen to have read all of the last 8 years of X-Men, so I've seen her in some of those titles. Do I recommend it? If you love Domino, if you miss that version of Deadpool that was before everything had to be pushed to 11 and he could just be allowed to be funny and have his moments. I will say that David Baldion's doing a fantastic job in the series. Actually, I haven't always loved him as an artist. I think his faces have a certain gawkiness to them that sometimes can be a turnoff to me, but it really, really works on Domino. I really enjoy this cast, and I'm hoping now that we've gotten this setup out of the way, and now that everybody can see that this is a very popular series and it's probably not going anywhere for the next 6 issues unless it's canceled for the new Uncanny X-Men series, along with all the other X-Men titles, I think we're probably in for some fun. And a lot of the creators online have been really, really hyping this Domino Annual, which is out pretty soon. And so that will be the next Domino book we talk about, and hopefully a lot of good things to say there too. So this is a very fun, silly X-Men title, and it's nice to have those. The thought that I'll leave you with is we don't have a lot of these kinds of titles starring female characters, right? We have Harley Quinn, and how many else can you really name that are on the funnier, sillier side? They tend to be all ages books like Squirrel Girl or Miss Marvel or Moon Girl, but we don't have a lot of books that are for adult or at least older readers that are violent, that have blood and heavy topics, that star women, and that also are silly. Whereas we have characters like Deadpool for that, and pretty much any other violent male character can get you there, whether that's anybody from, Wolverine himself all the way to Lobo on the DC side. So even though this is not my total cup of tea, I do recognize that it's a cup of tea that we have not gotten the chance to be offered too much over the course of the past decades of comics. So if Domino winds up becoming the Marvel Harley Quinn, that is okay with me. I think it would be nice to have the variety, and it's nice to show off such an interesting character who's so often been relegated to a supporting role. Our next X-Men book of the week is Iceman. Number 1 is the return of Iceman to his own series, although this one is already stated to be a limited series. And back is writer Sina Grace from the last series that he had in 2017. Iceman number 1 is written by Sina Grace with art from Nathan Stockman, color art from Federico Blee, letters from Joe Sabino, cover art from W. Scott Forbes, and it is edited by Annalise Bisa, Darren Shan, and X-Men group editor Jordan D. White. Where to even begin with Iceman? Well, let's backtrack to before Secret Wars. We had the teenage X-Men back. They were starring in their own title written by Brian Bendis called All New X-Men. And towards the end of that title, just shy of Secret Wars in 2015 or maybe the end of 2014, teen Jean Grey, notices that teen Iceman is gay. Apparently he's been this way, born that way, but he'd never really admitted it. And we know from our adult Iceman that he was never going to do more than drop the most oblique hints at it over the course of his life. But Jean Grey outs him in a scene that we could have a lot of debate about, but there you go. And so then young Iceman talks to old Iceman, and old Iceman realizes, finally comes to terms with the fact that he is also gay, and he comes out. And that's where we got that 2017 series, also written by Sina Grace, was exploring what it meant for Iceman to be out. Now, that didn't really have any huge adventures for Iceman. He did have a few run-ins with Daken, but otherwise it was kind of just a lot of him with his family, him with his younger self, a one-off against Juggernaut, a one-off with Richter, that just allowed us to spend a little bit more time with him as this renewed version of his character. Now, since then, when that title shut down, he actually went on to be the B-Squad leader in X-Men Gold, so we saw a lot of him in X-Men Gold. Nothing super consequential with him there in terms of character development, other than it was nice to see him as a leader because Kitty Pryde keeps pushing him into that direction. You know, Storm doesn't want to lead right now. Wolverine is dead. Jean Grey, I guess, maybe wasn't quite back at that time. So Iceman's really one of the next ones down the list in terms of a lot of experience. And in the course of that, shortly after Kitty Pryde's non-wedding to Colossus, Iceman sleeps with the new Pyro that is on that team. He's not the Pyro we knew from before. He's a new one, but he sleeps with Iceman. And that, I think, happened probably just before this in continuity. So where do we stand here? Well, Iceman's kind of in the mansion being like, look, I want to do some stuff. Send me on a mission. Let me do things. And Kitty Pryde originally says that she's going to give him this really cool team of X-Men, but then they get diverted to doing something else. And so Iceman, who has been training a lot of younger X-Men while he's in the mansion, just gets Bishop. Now, Bishop is another character who went through a lot of transformation and then got put aside, right? Because we had this evil, deadly Bishop who was tracking down Cable and Hope, and that was a long time ago now. It was before Avengers vs. X-Men back in 2010, and he then got kind of sort of rehabilitated in Uncanny X-Force in the early period of Marvel now, and then he's very recently been in Astonishing X-Men, but we haven't really seen a whole lot of Bishop as a team member. We haven't spent a whole lot of time with him, and I actually think he's a really nice contrast for Iceman. I think Sina Grace picked really well here because Bishop is extremely in control of his power and he is extremely cynical. He's like, just get it done, right? Whereas Iceman is increasingly in control of his power, but he's much more happy-go-lucky, and people always say that he's like underachieving. So I actually think they're a really interesting combination with each other. And so the thing that Iceman winds up going to check out is the Morlocks and problems with the Morlocks. So this is something he actually notices on his own, not something he's been assigned by Kitty. And the Morlocks have such a long history in X-Men, I couldn't possibly recap it to you. I mean, I couldn't even tell you the last time we've seen them, honestly, because they're just one of those plots that just pops up whenever an X-writer needs somebody to be hated and feared. And that's actually a really interesting aspect of how they're being used here. Sina Grace makes the case that it's actually mutant on mutant violence against the Morlocks because other mutants are feeling that they are not assimilating. Now that's a really interesting topic as we're going to parallel it to a character that's newly out and gay because assimilation is, you is somebody saying you're allowed to be different as long as you act the same, right? It's like saying, that you have a friend who's of color, whether they're, an African-American or there's somebody who's Asian or somebody who came from another country. But you say, they talk just like me and my friends because they've assimilated very well. And that's a very surface level definition of it. But you can apply that to all groups of people who are not part of the hegemonic group, the group that's in the vast majority, right? So to say that you would want somebody who is gay to be very assimilated is you don't want them to talk about a lot of their gay topics, whatever that might be, right? You want them to just act just like all of your other friends that you don't know the sexuality of or that you know that they're straight and they just happen to be gay on their own time. Now, that's not what this episode is about, but it does give you a little bit of insight about what Sina Grace is doing with the Morlocks. Basically, the Morlocks are the ugly mutants. They live in the sewer. They have weird body-modifying powers, and they're the mutants who probably are not just going to get by looking pretty up on the top side, much more like Inhumans are frequently portrayed. And so they've been very much a class that has needed to be a protected class of mutants over the years. And here we see another group of mutants basically preying on them and saying, like, look, it's not good enough to be who you are. We need to get you out of here because you're harming the mutant cause and mutant acceptance. And this is something that's been paralleled in a lot of groups that have faced a lot of discrimination in the real world. So I really was very interested in that plot. Notice how I've said a lot of good things. If you remember to my earlier This Week in X's from earlier this year, I did not really like the Iceman title. Unfortunately, I'm here to tell you I didn't really like this one, but I want to help you understand the why of that, because I've already talked to some people who do like it, and I don't want to just say this is bad comic books. So one thing is that Iceman just doesn't even feel like old Iceman. He doesn't feel like he's a new Iceman. He feels like a very kind of cardboard version. He's like Water Iceman. He just doesn't feel solid to me. We get his like night out on the town at the beginning, and none of his quips really make sense. And all through the issue, his voice and his one-liners feel a little bit off. So if you're going to do this character who's one of the cheekiest characters this side of Peter Parker at Marvel, you got to make him snappy. And I just still don't think that the Iceman written by Sina Grace is super snappy. The other thing is that the artwork for me, I actually like the line art from Stockman, but Federico Blee and I have not been really agreeing these past couple weeks on these review shows. He colors this in this like hyper saturated, almost cartoonish way, and it just doesn't really fit with the vibe. It makes it feel like a very mainstream early 2000s comic, but it doesn't have like the snap of that. It doesn't have the intensity of that. So the colors are really saturated, and then it makes, I think, the script feel even a little bit limp too. Now, that's all. And there's other small nitpicks I can make about the way that the young X-Men are written in the Danger Room. We only get a scene or two with them, but a lot of people have called out Sina Grace on he writes these very clunky lines for the young X-Men, like ID or one of them yells back and forth, "Come on, I thought you liked Beyonce, let's get in formation," which could be a funny joke, but it's a few years old now, and it's written in such like an obvious way with no character affectation applied to it that it kind of just clunks. So here's my bottom line on all of this. Is it a terrible issue of X-Men comic books? No, it's perfectly fine. But if you are going to have all this fanfare for this character to come back after his last series was canceled, but his trade sales were strong, and you're going to take the time to put this book together, then don't you think the first issue should be amazing? Shouldn't it be mind-blowing? Isn't that what editors are for? Like, so for me, like on a scale graded in a vacuum, it's like a slightly less than average comic book. But graded with the knowledge that we had the series canceled, now we're spending the effort to bring it back, and this is what we got. I really just couldn't get with that. I'm sure that it's really hard to do all these things, make him snappy, make the art match the script. That's why I don't make comic books. I can't draw, and I can't do a lot of these other things that comic makers make. But in my capacity here as your X-Men advisor, I still feel like this is very skippable. Now, we have a few tickles of some interesting things that could be happening here with some X-Men villains, including a final page reveal with a character that we all love and we have not been seeing too much of. Well, not all of us, but me. All of us in this room love. We haven't been seeing too much of her lately. So maybe next issue is going to be really interesting. I hope so. It took a while for Grace to get warmed up on that last issue, and he was really pumping by the time that it was in the back half. But the back half here starts with issue 3 of 5, so he does not have a lot of time to warm up. Next, we have Old Man Logan number 47. Old Man Logan number 47 was written by Ed Brisson with art from Damian Cochero, color art from Carlos Lopez, letters from Corey Petit, a cover from Andrea Sorrentino. It is edited by Chris Robinson, Christina Harrington, and X-Men line editor Jordan D. White. This is the second half of a 2-part story with Alpha Flight. Wolverine and Alpha Flight go to the small town. There's this alien kind of biological entity that's in the town, kind of creeping through it and kind of taking it over. And Wolverine and Alpha Flight are fighting against it. I think a lot of your enjoyment of this comic has very little to do with whether you like Old Man Logan, and a lot to do with how much you like and remember Alpha Flight. We only have 4 members of Alpha Flight here: Guardian, Snowbird, Shaman, and Puck. And so that might not even be the members of Alpha Flight you really like. And I'll admit, I get very confused about Guardian's history because he's been dead and not dead. I can't even remember what his powers are half the time. But that's part of what's going on with this issue, is that there's a lot of shorthand for their powers. We don't get all these cute caption boxes like Shaman is a shaman. They kind of just do the things that they do. And so if you know who they are and you know what their powers are, it's actually really entertaining. And they do a lot of fun. Each of them have a lot of fun moments. But if these characters are strangers to you, if you have no affinity for that 1980s and early 90s run of Alpha Flight or any of their subsequent reboots, it's kind of just going to land with a thud, because they're just a bunch of random characters and we don't really understand their motivation or why they're acting like they are, or why it's funny that they do things or interesting that they do things. We do see Old Man Logan act in a kind of clever way here, but the whole plot of Old Man Logan over the course of the past year is that his healing factor is really just giving up. He's thrown himself wholeheartedly into this X-Men life. He was in X-Men Gold. He was in his own title, he's in Weapon X, and it's just too much for his fragile old Wolverine body to take. And he's really not catching up with his injuries, even though he's pumping some of the special chemical he acquired a few arcs ago into his blood that accelerates his healing factor. It also kind of blows it out so that it doesn't work as well the next time. And a lot of the grand finish of this comic book has to do with Wolverine getting really, really injured. And I know that we have all of the plot mechanisms in place to make that work fine, but it just kind of took me out of the arc that I think Brazan has been like slowly building me on over these arcs, where I'm getting deeper and deeper into this and actually really enjoying this title, to be like, oh, Wolverine's going to do that thing where he just throws himself into fire and gets totally burnt into, you know, a bacon smelling crisp, and then he's going to be fine. Because I thought that the whole point of his arc was that he couldn't really do that. Now, who knows? Maybe we're going to see a lot of consequences for that in the next issue. Maybe that will be fine. But, you know, this was like a really fun, easy issue. It kind of felt like a really lightweight issue from the late 80s, although that would probably have a lot more caption boxes explaining all of those things that I said that weren't explained here. Now, we already know that Old Man Logan is going to continue into his next series, which is a limited maxi series called, I think, Dead Man Logan, also by Brazan. So we're just like wrapping up the last couple of things before that occurs. Plus, next week, we have Logan, young man, middle-aged man Logan, coming back with the return of Wolverine, and it's going to be the first time we've had them both side by side in the same universe, and yet it's still going to take months and months to wind down this old Logan. So I think if you're a big Alpha Fight fan from back in the day, pick up the last issue in this one. It's fun, and it really reminds you that Wolverine had a connection to these characters. But if not, this is certainly not the time to hop back on the series. And unless something really changes in the next couple of issues, I think the time to do any hopping back on is probably going to be with that Dead Man Logan series that's upcoming. Next, we have X-23 number 4. X-23 number 4 was written by Mariko Tamaki, with art from Juan Cabal, colors from Nolan Woodard, letters from Corey Petit, a cover by Mike Choi and Jesus Bertov, and it is edited by Annalise Bisa, Christina Harrington, and X-Men line editor Jordan White. This is the 4th chapter of a very creepy clone showdown between X-23 and Gabby, the honey badger, and the remaining members of the Stepford Cuckoos. Now, there is nothing very specifically that comes right before this, other than the fact that we know Honey Badger is now a clone of X-23, and I've covered that before on this program. Now you know she's a clone of X-23. The thing that you need to know about this particular issue is it's very much the next thing that happens after a chase issue. Last issue was a big chase. The Cuckoos had Honey Badger. They were moving in one direction with her. X-23 was on their tail. Now, you cannot evade X-23 forever, but the question was, did the Cuckoos evade her long enough to do the thing that they wanted to do? Currently, there were only 3 Cuckoos in Marvel continuity, but they started out as 5, the quintet, the hive mind, that were all miniature Emma Frost, and together were very powerful psychics, but by themselves were kind of just very kind of B or C grade psychics. And so they would like to be complete again and have 5 of them again. And that's the struggle here. Not only a struggle between them and X-23 about if there's going to be 5 of them, but almost a struggle about the nature of what it means to be cloned. Like, are we kind of watching a proxy fight between Wolverine and Emma Frost in a way here? Or have these children, clones, evolved enough into their own human beings that they are having their own distinct relationship to each other? And what does it mean in terms of that distinct relationship to each other? That they are all clones. So that's the setup and where we've been. This issue itself, I loved it, but I can understand why people do not like it. It is extremely decompressed. It is very light on script, and it really kind of just flies by reading it. But that's because, as I said, the chase is over, and we're kind of seeing where all of the pieces fell out of the chase. And X-23 is kind of closing in the Cuckoos, and now the Cuckoos feel like maybe they need to push back against X-23 to prevent her from interrupting them. I loved it. I think that Juan Cabal and Nolan Woodard are delivering some of the most amazing art that we have seen in X books in a really long time. And they did the same thing in Orphans of X on X-23's all-new Wolverine title earlier this year. There are so many visual callbacks here to both Grant Morrison's new X-Men and Joss Whedon's Astonishing X-Men, specifically to Frank Quitely in Morrison's X-Men and to John Cassaday in Whedon's X-Men. There are points that they specifically ape panels and looks from those, and it's just mind-blowing how close they get to it. But even when they're not aping it, it just has a feeling that those two series had. So that gives us like another layer of this kind of like re-legislating the past aspect of this title. So it's not an issue you just pick up out of the blue. I think probably issue 2 or 3, if you're just going to read one, might give you a little bit more sense of what's really interesting about this title. But my complaint previously was I didn't really feel like we had gotten to the rhythm of Lara, the human who's also Lara the hunter underneath her humanity. Here we felt that, I think, a little bit more, even though it's still very quiet and we're not getting a lot of internal monologue. So I continue to have really high hopes for this title. X-23 is a character who has really not had a lot of dips in her history. If you go to her collecting guide on my page Crushing Crisis and you read every X-23 appearance and sequence, she's got no bad stuff. There's no weak stuff. It's all really good. And I want to be able to keep saying that about her. I was starting to get a little bit worried with issue 2, but it's really feeling strong again. And much like Domino, I think ultimately we've got to see how this initial arc ends and what the next arc looks like to really understand if this title is going to continue to be a positive addition to the X-23 canon. Our last X-Men book of the week is X-Men Blue number 35, the penultimate issue of this series. X-Men Blue number 35 was written by Cullen Bunn with art from Marcus Toe, color art from Matt Milla, letters from Joe Caramagna, cover by R.B. Silva and Matt Milla, and it is edited by Chris Robinson, Darren Shan, and X-Men group editor Jordan White. Let me just say one thing very plainly up front. If you've not been reading X-Men Blue, if you've not been reading these time-lost original X-Men forever or just since some prior point, this is an issue you can just pick up. It says it's actually part 3 of a story called Surviving the Experience. It's not. It is very much a one-shot issue that just helps you understand a very specific conflict. And that conflict is this. Is it worse for the time-displaced X-Men to stay in the present day or go back home? I have some opinions about what is worse. Worse for me as the reader, worse for the continuity, but let's think of it in terms of each one of the characters, because that's what this issue does. It pairs each of the characters with their older counterpart, which we can do now for Jean Grey, and asks kind of what's going on in their life, what would it be like if they went back, and then what would it be like if they stayed, and which is worse and which is better. So Jean Grey now has her older Jean Grey, who's this, leader of the X-Men again. Is it so bad for her to stay? She kind of got past the Phoenix Force. Everything seems like it might be okay for her, but she knows because of her huge power that she'll continue to have a target on her, just like her older self has always had a target on her. Is that good or bad? Is it worse to go back and rejoin the original timeline knowing that she's got to go through everything that Jean Grey has been through? She's got to, crash the space shuttle and have the Phoenix replace her and then come back to find Scott has been married. All of these things. Whether or not she retains any foreknowledge that they're going to happen, it's a hard life that Jean Grey has had. And then to die for years and come back and know that her husband is dead. It's hard. So what would you choose if you were Jean Grey, right? The next probably hardest choice of the X-Men that have older counterparts to deal with each other is probably Iceman. Now, Iceman really has not had a terrible life. He hasn't had too much tragedy. Even his parents are still alive, which for a lot of the other X-Men, they can't say that. But Iceman has this one big sticking point that the teen Iceman came out and got to live as his authentic self while he's been in the present day. But our adult Iceman didn't have that revelation until he met the teen Iceman in the present day. So for Iceman to stay, it actually doesn't seem that bad at all. He gets to just continue living his life. He's a much more powerful X-Men than he was in the classic stories, and he's being his best self. But if he goes back, whether or not he retains his memories, he's not out anymore, and he doesn't get to come out for decades of time in the story, or at least a decade and a half in terms of a elapsed Marvel timeline. Is that worth it? Could he really go back to not being his true self in the past? That is a really hard choice. It seems like it's also better for him to stay in the present. What about Angel? Well, Angel doesn't really have the chance to have a conversation with Archangel because he is not one of many words. But he knows if he goes back to the past that he's got to go through all of that, getting his wings removed, being taken over by Apocalypse, being the Death Seed, dying, getting his mind wiped. Archangel's been through a lot. Probably one of the most tragic repeated arcs after Jean Grey in terms of these 5 original X-Men. Warren Worthington going back, though, has to go all through that again. So isn't it better for him to stay in the present day? And then we get Beast. Now, this one's a little bit trickier. Our Hank McCoy teenage version isn't the blue beast yet, but he gets mixed up with magic. And so he's got this kind of mystical white beast that he's become. And there's the sense that because he has that transformative experience so much younger than our old Hank McCoy, that he's already spiraling out of control. And we've been able to blame our old Hank McCoy for a lot of stuff, including bringing these X-Men to the present. And so even though Hank McCoy has not had such a bad life, it's like this younger Hank McCoy, is he more off the rails? Is he more out of control? Is he gonna like open up the whole world for the Goblin Queen to take it over if he stays? Like, and shouldn't his penance for growing into the older Hank McCoy that brought the X-Men back be that he go back? So probably for the other three, they would feel better about staying. But for Hank, it might be better for him to just go back because it might be less tragic. And then finally we have Cyclops. Cyclops, who has no double anymore because his older Cyclops died defending the mutant race. And so he has to either live in the present without his older reflection or go back to the past knowing he will live to lead the mutant race and then ultimately die. So I did kind of recap the issue for you, but I couldn't possibly because Cullen Bunn does some really deft work in each of these conversations. We get some things we've been waiting to hear for each of these characters, particularly Jean Grey and Iceman. And no amount of speculation and recapping that I'm giving to you here could replace this issue. So if you liked that recap and you love these characters, buy this issue, okay? Not only is it written extraordinarily well, but it looks beautiful. Marcus Toe over these past couple of months has really, really proven that he is among the best of the best on the X line, and I hope we get to keep him associated with the X-Men books because he's got a really great touch for these characters, and all credit to Matt Miller, who's been a fantastic colorist on X-Men Blue. I hope he stays in the family too. So where is this going to end? We have one more issue, and this issue explicitly says this happens before Extermination #1. So it's not like any of these X-Men are going to get killed in the next issue because we know they all show up in Extermination. But what's going to happen? How's Cullen Bunn going to put a final tag on this story that he's been writing in terms of these X-Men just since the spring of 2017, but in terms of Magneto since before Secret Wars? So like going on 4 or 5 years of that. I'm really interested to find out, and I'm really happy to be able to say that this has been a stronger title for the last couple of issues, arcs. It just makes me happy to say that I'm not here to talk negatively about X-Men titles, and I certainly have a lot of positive things to say about this one. I think it may have been my favorite read of the week just because those conversations were so satisfying. That's it for new X-Men comic books this week, and there are no X-Men collections out this week. So that's all we have got to say. If you need to get caught up on these books, if you're listening to all the things I'm saying and being like, where do I read that? What orders does that go in? You have to know that Crushing Comics began as a guide to collecting and reading Uncanny X-Men on my website, Crushing Crisis. And now you can go there and it recaps every X-Men book ever made, how they've all been collected. But even if you're just reading online on something like Marvel Unlimited, it tells you what order they go in and how they thread in and out of each other, where the characters appear and disappear to. So hopefully that can help you get caught up if you're thinking about catching up. And Marvel Unlimited is a great deal. It's got almost all X-Men ever in terms of the main titles, and it can cost you as little as $6 or $7 a month if you sign up for the yearly deal. So I don't get anything from telling you that. I'm just telling you it's a good idea. If you think this show is a good idea, I would love it if you would leave me a comment. I love the conversation in the comments, or like and subscribe. It's not only just what everybody on YouTube tells you to do, but it's because it generates data both for me and for YouTube, and it's what helps this get recommended to other comic fans that are on YouTube looking for content. So you putting your comment, your like, your subscribe in this video helps more people to see the video and helps us have an even grander audience to talk about the grand design of X-Men. So I've been your host, Peter. This has been This Week in X, presented by Crushing Comics, and thank you so much for watching.